Welcome to the May 7th edition of the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series, brought to you by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Kenneth L. Johnson, president of the Harlem, New York-based diversity recruitment firm East Coast Executives. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If it's your first or 21st, please jump in the chat and tell us where you're from. The Digital Career Success Series, DCSS, is a professional development series that helps members of our Urban League Young Professional chapters and other diverse job seekers develop new skill sets that will enhance their careers through digital platforms such as webinars, Facebook, and Instagram Live. The goal is to provide an opportunity for professional development right from one's computer. If you want more, visit us at nuljobsnetwork.com. All right, I see people are jumping in the chat. Everybody seems to be ready to go, so I guess this is a good time to introduce you to our guest today. Today's DCSS, Creating Safe Spaces, features Alia Sutton-Bay and Amanda Treppa. Alia, how's it going today?
All is well. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Man, we're extremely excited to have you here. If you do not mind, please tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Alia Sutton-Bay from Philadelphia. Have a background in youth development, but also spent a lot of my career working in human resources, and right now running a Black women's leadership program, teaching Black women how to navigate what I like to call the minefields of the workplace, and also working with organizations on psychological safety.
Yeah, well, you're in the right place today because that's what we're going to have a conversation about. So we appreciate you joining us. So Amanda, welcome to the Digital Career Success Series. What's happening? Talk to us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, how are you? Good afternoon. So happy to be here. I'm coming to you from Detroit. I am a leader in HR at a nonprofit here in Detroit, but I didn't start out that way. I had worked in corporate America for at least 10 years, where I went through a lot of workplace abuse experiences, and then started to make my way into policy. And how do we fight back? How do we push back and protect ourselves in the workplaces? So I am the leader for the Workplace Psychological Safety Act in Michigan, as well as Connecticut, working on policy and also trying to pilot programs within my nonprofit to really enhance psychological safety. That's what I'm working on the most right now.
And you're doing a lot of work over there, I see. That's amazing. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Well, you said the word, right? You said psychological safety, and that's kind of what we're here to discuss today. So let's kind of jump in. So there's some foundations for building an effective team rooted in psychological safety. And basically what we're talking about is when people feel safe to speak up, take risks, admit mistakes, collaboration and performance improve, right? So that's a quote there. But let's kind of jump in. I'd like to start with you, Alia. What are your thoughts on just the importance of psychological safety as it relates to not only building teams, but just kind of building yourself and your professional development?
Absolutely. So the root of it, right? Psychological safety is about, can I speak up? Can I express my concerns? And can I make mistakes in the workplace without fear of humiliation, retaliation, and shame? And unfortunately, for a lot of us, that has not been the case in the workplace. When we talk about traditional workplace practices, we talk about get the job done at any cost, right? And sometimes that's the cost to our psychological safety. And I always like to kind of level set by saying we do so much in the workplace for some physical safety, right? We've got fire alarms, we've got buzzers, we've got OSHA regulating safety in the workplace. We know where the AED is. The fire commissioner has us running fire drills. We've had gun intruder safety training. And then I'll pose the question to you: what explicitly are we doing to promote our emotional safety, our psychological safety that protects us from how we receive feedback? So if we can do all that to protect ourselves from a fire, we can do the same thing to protect ourselves from being discriminated or mistreated in the workplace.
Man, now you got me really thinking. I never kind of looked at it as far as the balancing act between the two, right? Psychological safety, physical safety, but the importance is truly there. Amanda, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, everything that happens, like mental health is health, right? Everything that happens to you emotionally, mentally is going to affect the rest of your body. That is a proven fact, science. I'm not going to pretend I'm a doctor, but we've read enough about it to know that that's real. So you need to treat it as such, because what happens at work is going to affect what happens at home and kind of the whole cycle of life. And if you can have a safe space that you feel free to grow and to learn, that we spend over 90,000 hours of our lifetime at work, just to give you perspective. If you can have that safe space, that can translate to so much more in your life beyond the workplace. And that's what we're really looking for people to feel healthy inside and out.
I can tell that what you guys are speaking about is resonating because I'm looking at the chat and the comments keep jumping up. We have people from all around the country, but they're chiming in and they're speaking to some of this. So please continue to lock into the chat. And also, we will have a Q&A segment. So save your questions, drop your questions in, and we'll actually have Amanda and Alia answer those questions. Okay, listen, let's talk about this, right? So just foundationally, when you're building and you're speaking about safety, you have to kind of have some tenets to that. So building the foundation of safety, but it should happen from the start, right? So if you're leading a team, it's all about people feeling safe. And when they feel safe, not just safe physically, but safe to speak up and things of that nature. But you really need to start this out from the beginning because that's your opportunity to kind of build and have a first impression. Let's talk a little bit about that. Alia, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I want to start with using the word culture, right? What is the culture of your workplace? And I'm not talking about that statement you have on your website or all of your list of values. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what do people experience when they show up into your workplace? So culture is behavior, right? So what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? And when we talk, I think about it in terms of Maslow's like hierarchy of needs, right? And so we know at the foundation, we're talking about safety, food and security, right? Well, when we talk about in teams, what we're talking about is psychological safety. And if you don't have that as the foundation, then you can't get to, belonging. You can't get to feeling of esteem, and you sure enough can't get the self-actualization, which really is where teams thrive. Like if you want teams to innovate and teams to create, I have to feel comfortable. If I make a mistake, I'm not going to be shamed. I'm not going to be retaliated against. I had an early mentor tell me one time, she said, Alia, the only people who aren't making mistakes are people who aren't working. And so you understand what I'm saying? So you want people to be working, right? And in order for people to work, they've got to feel safe. So in order to get to that innovation and creativity that we all want and expect from our teams, they have to feel safe. So you have to have a culture of safety. And that is not saying, we created a safe space. It's really about what do people experience? So asking the question, are people experiencing that safety when they come into our organization?
Amanda, as we dive into this topic about psychological safety, and I believe it is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? Mm-hmm. What should organizations be doing from the start to make sure that people know that there's a culture of safety?
Please don't throw a pizza party. That's how I personally feel. I feel like a lot of times they just try to throw things and be like, we're going to give you extra 15 minutes to like have some pizza or go outside, touch some grass. And I'm like, that's not it. It's actually taking a step back and looking at, like we're talking about from the start, right? What are those process and procedures from the moment you apply? What does that look like? How do you respect people's time? And that's at least for myself, when I'm stepping back and like, it's mental health awareness. Are people feeling burnt out? What have we been doing? How do I step back and say, okay, did we waste everyone's time when we asked them to try this new thing out? All right, let's scrap that. And really just trying to approach it from an empathetic, respectful place. That's what they should be doing, and having open and direct conversations. That being said, not every place is equipped for that right now, right? Mm-hmm. But all it takes is one leader within a team to be able to create that safe space. And that's what you can work on right from the start.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it from that purview, because I'm just wondering, right? This seems to me, when you're talking about psychological safety, and as Alia had mentioned, like it's not just a statement on the website. There has to be some action behind it.
Yeah.
How does that kind of, I guess, reverse engineer itself? If I'm the employee and I'm looking to come to leadership because there's a challenge, what's the platform that I present that particular challenge or concern? How do I do that?
You do that. Oh, sorry. I didn't know.
Go ahead, Amanda. Yes,
okay.
Please.
It's going to depend. I'll be very frank, right? Like I said, some places are set up with safer models. You have some safe people that you feel like you can talk to. However, I always encourage everyone to CYA, cover your. So the best way to approach it is to put everything in writing first and foremost, because I don't think people explain the why we do things, but always put it in writing, because that's how you hold yourself accountable to what you were looking for, and you hold them accountable to what was actually presented to them. That is what I always recommend as the first step. And then it's going to, hopefully, at wherever you work, you have a leader on your team that you can sit down and say, hey, I sent this to you. Can we talk about it? How do we scale this up? How do we address it on a bigger scale? That is the small thing. If you do have an organization that has processes and procedures, maybe follow them. But again, try to lean into just finding that one person that you know you're supposed to go reach out to. Not necessarily HR, can be someone on your team, and lay it out in writing just so you can start from that and have a structure.
Excellent. Alia, we have good leaders. We have leaders that need some growth, right? So as we speak about leadership, kind of tell me what you see some of the good leaders doing, and also some of the things that leaders should avoid doing. And I know that's a multi-pronged question, but it kind of stays in the same wheelhouse, right? What are you seeing them doing?
Absolutely. One of the things I see leaders doing to promote psychological safety is being very explicit about it, right? So there's I'm saying we've created it, but also paying attention to those pulse surveys, right? That you're sending out to your team. Are you doing stay interviews? Like, why do we wait for people to exit out and do an exit interview and say, tell me what I did wrong so I can't, I don't do it in the future, versus when someone is working and is doing well, asking them, hey, why do you stay here? What are we doing well? And how can we do more of that? I think too often we think about our failures, right? And what we're doing wrong so we can stop doing things. But I'm encouraging leaders to ask themselves, what are the things that we're doing right so that we can do more of that? And I'll say this, when I usually pose the physical versus psychological safety and I ask, what are you doing? A lot of them talk about these anonymous polls, right? So we have an anonymous survey. Well, I would argue or challenge you to say that if it has to be anonymous, then we really don't have a psychologically safe workplace. If it has to be anonymous, when it's safe, people are free to express their opinions very vocally, very publicly. And leaders also have to demonstrate vulnerability, humility, and trust, because it starts at the head. And so if they're not demonstrating those things, then what makes staff feel comfortable in being able to demonstrate those things? And it's okay for leaders to sometimes say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And that level of vulnerability, when it happens, you can really start building teams that begin to trust and know that we're going to hold each other accountable.
Let's stay there. So Amanda, we spoke about great teams being built on trust and some of the pre-work for this session. Trust is usually an earned thing. Am I right? Like how are people building trust organizationally?
They're building trust with leadership, like Alia just said. Like, I, as a leader, I have moments where I can say, I messed up. We need to figure this out. Can anyone help me? Or I have people come to me and say, I really messed this up with an onboarding of a new person. Can you help me fix it? And being able to have that rapport with each other is how you start to build trust. But it does come from the top down. It doesn't just come overnight. And it has to be something that you put in place as a unit, starting from the moment someone's going through onboarding. Literally, when they're going through onboarding, and making sure that every step as they are making their journey is supported, and that you create that, hey, check in with me. How are you feeling? How are you feeling about this and that? Are you uncomfortable? What can I do better? It's having that from the start, from the moment they start the process. Because like later on, when you have a stay interview, it might be a little bit more detailed on what their issues are or what their concerns are in the workplace. But you don't want to eventually in a stay interview have someone say, I'm here just because of the money, because we want people to stay because they feel good when they're there. Like, money can come and go, but when people feel good about the work they're doing, they're just going to do better. And that's why those two should coincide. And that's also trust building, is making sure people are being paid what they're worth. But that's a whole different conversation.
We'll have that salary negotiation from Digital Career Success Series for sure. Hey, listen, so I hear you speaking about trust, but you're also speaking about accountability on both sides, it sounds like. Alia, what are the we talked about leadership, but as an employee, what are our challenge? I'm sorry. What are our responsibilities to also foster a trusting and accountable environment?
Yeah, so I got to go here because one of the things Amanda talked about earlier was like this science behind things, right? And there is science behind trust, right? There's a chemical in the brain that gets released when we show empathy, when we recognize people, when we have meaningful conversations. So when I would say, what I would say to an employee is also we have to also manage our own stress, right? And so we also have to manage our work environments. So if I'm not, I would say advocacy as an employee. I have to advocate for myself. I have to be comfortable to go in and say, hey, leader, supervisor, manager, team, this is what I need from you. And too often we're not given the language to do that. So a lot of what we do in our trainings is tell people, what is the language for that? How do you take ownership for your work, take ownership for your feelings by starting off what we like to call an I statement. So I would come up to you and I would say, hey, Kenneth, I feel disrespected in meetings when you call me out. You have to have the language to be able to go in and advocate for yourself. So you also have to show up. So it's a interconnection of things. The environment has to also be right for me to feel comfortable to show up that way, to feel as though I can go in and ask for what I need. Because when we are not asking for what we need, we just show up in proximity. That means we're just showing up for work. We're really not engaging. We're really not innovating. We're really trying to survive a culture versus thriving in it. And so it's not isolated for the leader or for the employee. It is an interconnection between the two. The organization has to create an environment for wellness, and employees have to advocate for themselves.
And that's amazing. I know as we talk about leadership and we speak about awareness, I guess you can't really have that conversation without speaking a little bit about EQ, emotional intelligence, right? Empathy, things of that nature. So Amanda, what are we looking at or looking for from leadership when it just comes to, I don't want to call them soft traits because they're really necessities in today's workplace, but in those traits that may not be things that are written, but things that need to be understood as a leader, kind of fostering a psychologically safe team.
Yeah, that goes into, I think, something Alia was touching on about education, right? Like what are the words we use, but it's also the same thing as leaders of understanding how people are going to learn differently. Like if you are going to be a leader in a workplace, you have a responsibility to educate yourself. That's first and foremost. That is not on the employee. That is not on somebody coming in for an interview. You should understand that people, you're going to have to meet them where they're at. And as soon as that standard is set and being able to say, hey, okay, well, maybe they just don't feel like, for whatever reason, they're a little bit more introverted. That's okay. Give them tools then and say, hey, we have this chat set up, or I can touch base with you via email these times. Really meet them where they're at and give them the tools they need, and they will expand from there. The difference you will see in somebody from the moment you hire them to a year later, if they're given the proper support along the way, I believe creates a very well-rounded and amazing superstar who's happy to be there, happy to show up and trust you, and you can trust them back.
You know, so much said in that statement. I'm looking in the chat and people are saying yes, 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 and woo. Like, so listen, I know this conversation is resonating with a lot of people. Please know that we do this each and every Wednesday. So if you're looking to see the recorded version and replay of this actual conversation, you can find it on the Urban League Jobs Network YouTube channel. A lot of information is being shared. We want you to stay connected with us here. Please drop your questions for us to, I guess, speak about in the Q&A. All right, so I saw a slide come up, and the slide was about education, right? And kind of how, leaders are educating themselves. We spoke about how employees have to be responsible at some level for professional development and educating themselves as well. But if we're just having a conversation about standard employee rights, what are there some things out there that we need to be looking for? Amanda, I see you nodding your head, so I think you're locked and loaded on that topic.
It's one of my favorite topics, truly, and actually why I shifted into the HR space, right? To be able to provide people with education of their rights when they walk in the door, which is kind of an insane concept to I know a lot of the old school HR ways, right? Where it's like, we protect the company and the organization first. And I'm like, that's cute. But how the world actually works and how you build psychological safety is if I tell you the tools and you protect yourself, it not only allows us to be held accountable as an organization the entire time, but when investigations are conducted, right, you get the right person. But nobody is going to be able to do that or be able to address the right issue if both sides don't know the way to approach it. So people should know when you walk in the door that you have a right to be able to email and CC all these people on it if this issue is being addressed. There is no gatekeeping. And that is like one of the biggest things is no gatekeeping of what you should do if things hit the fan, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel unsafe, and what does that look like? I was really proud to build that in our onboarding so that like literally day one, people are walking through that with me and they can ask any questions they want. They understand what policies even exist in our state. So it's not just something that people put up in a coffee break room that drives me insane. How they're like, if you're having an issue, please call this number. Like nobody's calling that. And that doesn't explain what's actually happened to me when so-and-so is micromanaging me every day and yelling at me. Like, I don't understand how those two work together, right? So that's something that people have to embrace from the start and really educate. It's our job to educate those walking in the door.
Alia, thoughts on that?
I want to say yes and, right? I want to say yes and, but then Amanda, you had me thinking about also what the employee's responsibility is, back to Kenneth's earlier question, is when I'm interviewing for a job, you have to make sure you are asking the right questions too, and asking, what is your culture around this? How are difficult conversations handled? How is conflict handled, right? Do you have a norming document? Do my supervisor and I get an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about how we're going to deal with conflict if it arises? The problem is that when conflict arises, nobody has a document or a policy or a culture of how we deal with it. And then we start thinking from the back of the brain, we get in survival mode and we're yelling at each other and we're doing things, we're water cooler talking. But what about if we establish those things very early? And so I would say to folks, what questions are you asking in the interview to ensure that you are walking into an environment that is psychologically safe? And did you get a chance to tour the environment? Because remember, culture is behavior. So it doesn't matter what the HR rep tells me. When I walk into that environment and I walk around and I see how people are interacting, that gives me a better understanding of what is happening. So yes, HR should be telling you these things about your rights and policy, but as a potential employee, you should also be asking for them as well.
All right. So this is probably taking me somewhere where I didn't know we were going to go to this part of the conversation, but I'm thinking about what you're speaking about. And with this remote work environment that exists for some people out here, how is that impacting psychological safety? Anybody that wants to chime in on this, I think both of you probably have some thoughts on it. Amanda, let's start with you.
I think I love remote work. I think it's what we should be doing. A lot of the time, there's a lot of work that doesn't need to be done in an office. I'm just going to say it. Every job should be hybrid, in my personal opinion. Not speaking for my organization, I'm speaking as Amanda. Like, I really do believe that because like everybody works differently. I'm a person who can probably get a big chunk of my work week done literally at the first part of the week and then be able to do catch-alls through the rest of it. Psychologically, I think we're seeing a big backlash from those who are in survival mode, as Alia was just alluding to. They're in survival mode for control, and they are trying to find a way to see what everyone's doing at all times. But you can build that in from the moment you hire someone. You can be able to take them through an interview process of like 3 remote interviews, maybe sometimes 4 that are like 30 minutes at a time. You schedule it at different times, see if they hop on. Like if you're looking to see if they're going to be reliable, you know how to do it. It just takes extra work, yes, but tough luck. You want the best talent, you also have to work for it as a company and as an organization. It's just not going to be a given. But I do think we're finding that a lot of people are feeling a little unstable as companies are trying to find that control, and they're making me pop on every second. They're making me check this every second, or I have to move my mouse the right way if I just go to the bathroom, and that is starting to mess with people. Is there an easy answer? I don't have one for you for it, but I think that there's a way companies can do better by far on how they're addressing it.
Yeah, you you're making me think about this whole interview setting. I have a client that does that. They do kind of micro interviews, and then they also do them on a different platform. They do them on Teams, Zoom, just for kind of figuring out their remote people and how, comfortable they are with the technology and things of that nature. So it's so much more that leads to how people are coming into an organization. Alia, let's talk about that conversation. When people are working remote or in a hybrid setting, how do we see leaders kind of adjusting to that and still being responsible to building the trust of their team?
Yeah, I think it's about mindset. I think we've got to move away from traditional workplace mindset. A lot of our mindset is based on factory work, piecework, right? That if you think about our traditional workplace factories, even just the whole punching in on a time clock, which now translates to punching in on your computer, those are traditions that we've taken out of the factory. So leaders have to change their mindset. I always say to leaders, when you're bringing on an employee, it's about helping them understand what the destination is. You have to trust that they know how to get there, because there's multiple ways to getting to a destination, and micromanaging that really takes the autonomy away from the employee. So we need to really start talking about outcomes. What are the outcomes that you expect from an employee? Not necessarily the day-to-day outputs, but what is the final product? What is the final destination? And that's a huge mind shift change that a lot of leaders and we got to just call it out. There's an intergenerational thing happening. This is the first time that 4 generations are in the workplace at the same time. I'm gonna just call that out right now. and that is where the rub is, right? There's this rub between baby boomers and Generation X. They're very aligned in that, because we come from that grit and that resilience, and we keep wanting to promote that. And this is where psychologically safety comes in, because the newer generations coming into the workplace want workplace balance. And that's the psychological safety that they're asking for. And so we have to begin to figure out, how do we begin to shift, instead of telling them they're wrong, they're not being resilient, they're not showing up to work with grit, and saying, wait a minute, there's something to be learned from both sides of the generational tool, because what happened in between those generations was the technology gap. So we couldn't even have fathomed remote work when I was coming up. And so that's the shift for many leaders. And so how do we talk about what are people's outcomes when we're onboarding versus telling them how to get to the destination?
You know what? Okay, so let's take the journey here, right? So we spoke about remote work. We spoke about traditional work, remote work, hybrid work, multi-generational environments, right? Let's talk about the political and social climates that exist now, and how leaders need to really understand that psychological safety is essential. So let's go into that conversation, right? Human well-being at work. Amanda, thoughts?
Human well-being. I said it earlier. What happens at work affects what happens at home, and affects throughout. And what I just wanted to touch really quick on something Alia said with that generational gap, because that does come into here as well. I do find, like, I'm a millennial, I'll own it, even though I even look younger than that. And I am definitely, like, from a manager side of, like, as long as you get your work done, I don't care. Like, what works best for you, I'll meet you where you're at. Please take care of it. If you have a problem, let me know. Right. And I think for myself, I've seen a lot of folks try to get by. People who've mentored me try to get by and have to keep breaking through walls and ceilings wherever they can, and come out really exhausted and burnt out. So I've seen their, like, well-being really, like, suffer and decline, and sometimes not feel like, especially if they get passed over for that final promotion. I've watched that heartbreak a lot in recent years with people I've worked with and have mentored me. So I think that it's a intergenerational shift that needs to happen, so that well-being can be spread across all generation gaps, and we can all feel supported within. But in today's political and social climate, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, especially as workplaces are suddenly like, we can't have DEI, but we have DEI. That being the BS buzzword around parts, and trying to navigate that. Especially, like, even for myself in hiring process, like, I work at a nonprofit that comes under fire right now. And, like, what does that look like? Because we're going to hire who we hire. So, but it's that stress that happens for myself, for everyone else. And how can we make the workplace feel as peaceful as possible? and make sure that things are set in place so that when you walk in the door, this is all it is for now. Like it can be your 8 hours, and this is all you got to do. This is all we got to deal with. I will be here to support you. If you see something on your lunch break, you need extra time, really putting that mental health piece in front, not with pizza parties, not with always touching grass, but providing space when needed, or even extra. I know this is going to be groundbreaking, even extra mental health days. If a company or organization has, we've increased ours because people just need it right now.
All right. So as we speak about that and different things that organizations can do to allow for some psychological safety in this political and social climate that we're in, Alia, I know this is a sweet spot for you. This is some of the work that you're really passionate about. Do you want to speak to some of this?
Absolutely. I would say if you're still using the anonymous box, you should be asking yourself, what can I do to get rid of that anonymous box so that my employees feel safe to speak up? It is about really understanding people's experiences with those stay interviews. That's when you can ask people, how are you experiencing the workplace? Because here's the thing. We expect people to leave the outside world outside. How many times have we heard that? Oh, we need to leave the outside world out there. Well, okay. You can't control as an organization what's happening in the outside world, but you can control what's happening within the confines of your organization. So, what are some of the things that we're doing? And I would say we don't ask enough questions of our employees. We make a lot of assumptions. And so I encourage us, like, what are you doing to get those pulse surveys? If you haven't sent out a culture survey or a pulse survey, asking your employees, how are they experiencing the work environment? And let me say, let's not do this for performative measures. We should also be giving feedback. So when you are asking employees to give you information, you should also be telling them what you're going to do with that information. And if you're not going to move on it, to Amanda's point, we don't do enough of telling people why. When we talk about psychological safety and bringing down those stress hormones, is when people feel confident in understanding the why behind when something is happening. So get those pulse surveys, get those culture surveys. If you're a leader who is unsure of how to do that, I'm plugging. You got to hire a consultant to come in and do that work for you, right? If you are unsure of how to do that, because sometimes it doesn't rest in HR, because this is a culture shift in how HR may be seeing its role within an organization. And so really putting our egos aside, really talking about how do we give feedback. We have to be able to give feedback without ego, and we have to be able to receive it without being defensive. And the only way to do that is really by our behavior, and it comes from the top. So these are some of the things that they can be doing within their organizations. And to, like Amanda said, it's not about a pizza party. A pizza party is only effective if everything else falls in place. Like you understand what I mean? Like it can't be the thing. It's really the after thing, but not the thing. People got to feel safe, confident, or they just know you're doing it for performative measures and that it's not sincere. And that's a surefire way to lose trust.
It's the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. We're on with Alia Sutton, Amanda Treppa. I'm Kenneth L. Johnson. It would not be a National Urban League platform if we didn't speak about inclusion. In this case, we're talking about inclusive leadership. So let's kind of share this conversation, right? So as I look at the slide here, really what it's all about is empowering all voices, right? So let's just talk a little bit about the importance of that and how it benefits organization-wide. Amanda?
Yeah, it benefits organization-wide because your leadership and your team should reflect whatever work you're actually trying to do and accomplish. I find that there's often a disconnect of like, we're going to try to reach all these different groups with whatever products or whatever our mission is, but then no one actually is in alignment or matches. And it's usually a big red flag to me as far as like when I'm looking at a place, if I'm looking to join, but representation matters. It really does. Like being able to see some of my mentors break through a lot of ceilings and be able to learn from them, allowed me to think, okay, yeah, I could transfer into the HR space after 10 years in leadership that necessarily wasn't all of this, right? And that allowed me to grow, to really step in and build something even greater. And you just need to be able to allow people to see it exists. that something is possible. And that gives them hope, gives drive, and allows people to thrive and actually start to also trust more, because how did you get there? How did this happen? And being able to allow everyone else to ask the whys and grow from there.
As we speak about inclusive leadership, and there are facts to this. It reduces turnover, right? It increases the feeling of being on a team. Alia, can you talk about some other things that come with that? People talk about it, but when they embrace it, there are really benefits to that. So let's speak a little bit about that.
Right, because too often we talk about it as a moral imperative, as an ethical imperative. But let me speak the language to my business folks out there. It's an economic imperative in order for us to have inclusive leadership, because what we know is that innovation is spurred when there is inclusive design, right? When we design, let's speak about this from a design perspective. If we design programs, products for the most marginalized amongst us, we have actually created a product that impacts the collective. I'll give you an example. I talk about this in my trainings, the curb cutout. Everybody remembers when they were cutting the curbs out, and that was because ADA regulations required the curb cutout, and it was primarily designed for who? A vulnerable population of those who were dependent upon wheelchairs. Well, who gets to use the curb cutout now? Mom with the stroller, the delivery guy, the traveler with the wheelie bag. So really understanding that when we design for the most marginalized amongst us, we design for the collective. But the only way that can happen is if they have a seat at the table when the design conversation is occurring. And so when you look at companies that are more global, they have a more diverse and inclusive leadership, because you have multiple perspectives, not just based on, because a lot of times we are stuck in race and gender, and we can have a different conversation, but we've got to talk about neurodivergency, people who learn differently, people who think differently. There's many ways to have inclusion that extend beyond race and gender.
Love it. Also, many ways to take action. So let's just talk about that before we get into the Q&A segment. This is about taking action. This whole conversation really is about taking action, not only from the leadership standpoint, but also line staff employees. What can we all do together to make a psychologically safe environment? So Amanda, as we just kind of look at it holistically and say, okay, these are the things that need to happen for us all to, I guess, feel safe, right? And wow, it seems like such a simple thing to want, but such a hard thing to get in certain environments. So talk to us a little bit about what actions need to be taken for us to feel psychologically safe.
It's a very long list. I'm not going to lie to you, but some action items that, because a lot of people do come up to me and they say, like, what's something I can do that seems probably, I don't know, silly, which it never is, to really make my voice heard when I'm feeling uncomfortable or kind of socially withdrawn from the culture of my workplace. And somebody brought up to me, they're like, I really hate that they keep planning things outside of our work hours, or that they plan them at a bar, or that they do all these things. And I said, hey, have you given them 5 options that you would like? Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but at least you put them out there, and you can like submit that and say, hey, could we do these 5 things instead, to allow them to get to know, oh, that also could be why you're not coming to a bar at 6 o'clock off hours, and so on and so forth. So that's just like a simple take action thing that hopefully will be well received. But companies and organizations as a whole really need to address their turnover rates, because they're out of control right now. I don't think I've seen many companies that have any positive ones, truthfully. So they need to see and zero in on why that is. And whether it's doing a company survey, I really think it's a matter of like, you've got to start holding leadership accountable, because it's from the top down. And a lot of people don't like to hear it, but I'm going to say it because it needs to be said, because you set the tone, you set the expectations, and everyone else sees and learns from you. That's what really needs to happen. Policies needs to change, which is why I got so deep into Workplace Psychological Safety Act, because when you are presented in an HR setting, right, if you present it to a COO and you say, hey, A and B and C need to be complied with when dealing with whatever this conflict is, they're only going to follow A, B, and C. So we need to create policy, help push it as a workforce, as people, to get introduced in different states around the country. So that way, it's not only A, B, and C, but now you have policy D, which is workplace psychological safety, and you have to address that as well. So that is like the overarching, but there are smaller steps you can take within your workplace to make yourself at least feel a little bit better, or know that you've done all you can at that time.
Got you. Alia, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you doing some work with ERGs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, with some employee resource groups, telling them to go back to their companies and say, you have to fund us, you have to give us teeth. It can't just be, oh yes, it's a time for us to get together and really gripe about everything that's wrong with the organization. What kind of power and control and autonomy does the ERG have?
Yeah. I thought you were doing some work in that space, so I wanted to kind of give you the opportunity to speak about taking action over there, and you quickly did, right? You jumped right in, so I can appreciate that. What other taking action steps do you see? I know you spoke about the organizations being more supportive of the ERGs, and the ERGs kind of demanding that they're supported as well. But so that's the employee side. Leadership, what needs to start happening?
Leadership, we didn't talk a lot about middle management and where psychological safety happens within an organization in terms of middle management. What we know to be true is that toxicity tends to live in middle management. And so I am imploring organizations to think about, when you take someone who does a job really well and you promote them into a position of management, you are asking them to have a different skill set. So if I was the best direct support coach to walk the face of this company, and then you promote me to supervise coaches, that's another skill set. So I'm really asking organizations to think about, what is the transitional curve or education that you give managers when they stop managing work and start managing people, because that's where psychological safety comes in. It's a relationship thing about how we are engaging with people. And does that training include how to give feedback? Because when we're not giving feedback, people aren't growing, people aren't developing. And so, how do we promote psychological safety, and what should those managers be doing? Every manager should be meeting and checking in with their staff. That's how we build trust. You just don't demand trust. It's something that's earned, and you earn that by checking in and showing up and doing what you say. An organization, if you say you're going to do something, doing it, being a person of your word. And so I would talk about a lot, how are we training our managers to manage people? Are we having check-ins with our staff on the regular? You should never be supervising anybody for more than 30 days without checking in with them. And what is the cultural norm of the organization, and how is that explicitly stated? And then explaining to people, this is how this value shows up in our organization.
I love it. All right, so let's kind of jump into this Q&A segment. We have some really interesting questions here. William asks, right? What's being taken from the generation of grit? I'm only hearing they need to shift. What are we getting from that generation that we're speaking about being so gritty?
The generation of grit is to show up and get it done, right? That's the mindset, is to show up and get it done. And it's also something about work ethic, showing up for work on time. There is a difference in work ethic, showing up on time, getting the job done, not saying things like, it's not my job. It's true, some things may not be your job, but when you want to build trust and you want to build collaboration, I need to know that if a man is down on my team, someone else is going to show up. Those are the things that I'm speaking about when I talk about having that grit in the workplace.
Got it. All right, I'm going to keep running through these questions. We're going to try to get through most of them here. Does family and our general personal culture, our morality, values, and beliefs coincide and or conflict with business culture? Amanda, you want to jump in?
Sure. It can be both. And that's also going to be a big sign, at least I can say for myself, where I work now is in alignment with my values and beliefs, which was a big part of me wanting to go do the work there. And, it can coincide and be really positive. That's what keeps me, like I said, in the work and very proud about where I do work. Conflicting, that also has happened, where we're in alignment to a point where I don't believe that the culture promotes psychological safety. And that is my number one thing and belief. And I'm not going to be part of a culture that really tanks employees and puts them down when they speak up for themselves and fight for themselves. If there's not, I don't think there's a best way to approach it, but I do encourage, this is a new way of thinking, to really research somewhere before you work there and see what you're willing to say, like pros and cons to. Are you willing to say, okay, I need 100K, which I get 100%, but where's your line? And because at some point you're going to hit that line, no matter how much money you're making there, no matter what's happening, you're going to butt up against it, whether it's 5 years or 10 years. So that's the way I say they can coexist beautifully, but there's going to have to be a pros and cons list. Oh, you're muted, Kenneth.
Sorry about that. Let's jump into the next question. Nicole wants to know, what do you do when you have leaders who aren't comfortable or don't care about their team, colleagues, about their psychological safety? So that's one part of the question. But also, can you teach someone to care? And how do you hold them accountable for creating a safe culture? So multi-tiered question. I think it all aligns really well with the conversation. So let's go. Alia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I always like to say that your values need to align with where you're working, and you've got to ask those questions. So you've got to know what you're in for. And caring is not something that can be taught, but there's something I like to call bias disruptors. When you have a culture that has policies and procedures and things in place to ensure that my personal biases are not influencing workplace culture. And then also, I would say to people, you have a decision that can be made. And I know it's sometimes easier said than done to walk away and leave an organization, but we have to have a responsibility to our own psychological and emotional safety. And if I have a supervisor that does not care, and I've went through all of the proper channels, I went to HR, I went to my mentor. This is where you lean on your mentors for guidance. If you don't have a mentor, I encourage you to get one, someone that you can talk through before you make these mistakes. I made plenty of mistakes in the workplace because of discrimination. I am a woman. I'm a woman of color. I am all of these things. And I didn't have a mentor. So I end up doing some cursing and some finger call, some things that I shouldn't have done in the workplace because I was angry and upset. And so you have to, it's a two-part thing. What is the organization's responsibility to me, but what is my responsibility to myself?
Love it. Love it. All right, let's keep the conversation going. You know what? William, I believe, asked the question earlier about grit and that generation, but kind of wants to know, he wants to revisit it, right? He'd like to hear more about the thoughts on addressing the abuses of that shift that we were speaking about, away from kind of the grit culture. Any thoughts on that, Amanda?
Yeah, because I was also going to say what I get from the grit generation. I get that they always show up no matter what. I know that everyone works really, really hard, right? I watch my parents do it. I watch grandparents do it. And I take away that there's a better way to do it. That's all. Like, I am so thrilled that I love to work just as hard as they did, but I want to work well. So that's the shift I'm speaking of. You can do both. It's just, that's the shift that has to occur. And that means, how do you build these safe places? How do you build companies and organizations? Because somebody was also, I think, asking about, like, we're talking about it from an employee perspective, right? Like, we're the ones searching for jobs, but also not all these organizations or companies exist yet. So that's also why I think we see a lot more entrepreneurship in recent years, and folks building our spaces where we do feel safe. And that's a lot of the shift that we're going to be definitely visiting. But the abuses of the grit culture, I don't know if that's what they're referring to. If it's happening to me, like, it's not that bad because I had to go through it, so you should have to go through it. I think that is a really terrible misconception, and a lot of people do it. And what I try to lead from, and I am proud to say that, anyone I mentor hears it from me all the time, is because I went through it, I want to make sure you never go through it. That's the conversation. That's the exact verbiage that needs to shift.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I want to say yes, and also trying to look at it from the other person's shoes. I think a lot of times what I hear from my generation and the baby boomers is because we had to endure so much, and we look at some of the privileges, like we did not have sexual harassment policies early in my career. I endured so much, and I don't want you to have to endure it. But when I sometimes may behave in a certain way or lead in a certain way, take a moment to say, I get where she's coming from, because I can't even begin to imagine what that generation endured in the workplace. So I think that there's like this give and take on both sides, both of us looking at it from the other person's perspective. And I don't think we do that enough.
Got it. All right. And this may be our last question, but I want to get to this, and we can spend a little time here. I think we have some time. So it seems like there's some belief that these conversations are often geared more towards entry level and mid-level roles, right? But they're really asking us to share some thoughts that come from senior leadership. What can senior level people walk away with, right? What are actionable items that they can work on? So I want to jump into it. I thought we touched on it a little, but let's revisit. Amanda?
The conversations that need to be had on senior level leadership is what do they want their legacy to be? What do they want to leave behind? Because they're already in those leadership roles, right? There is not really a big battle for them to keep pushing, or like they usually are content where they are, right? So a lot of the things that are going to affect us in middle management roles or entry level roles are literally never going to impact them at this point. So for them, it's posing the question of like, you have a 36% retention rate, you have this and that. Is this what you want to be known for? And that we're going to be also losing money. There's a conversation that has to be had of who do you want to be? What do you want to leave behind? Would you want your kids to work here? It's actually being able to have the real conversation of everything we're talking about, right? How it impacts beyond just the workplace. And what simple things can you do procedures wise? Because it doesn't mean a lot of them don't like to do a lot of work. I'm going to be very frank. I have sat in a lot of these rooms, and senior leadership's like, oh, Amanda, that sounds like a lot. Yeah, it is. But you can also bring in the right people to do it and be able to build these things if you give them the freedom and the respect to do so, and be able to say, hey, can I revamp your HR department? And like, look, I can handle it, but this is what it's going to do for you. So it's someone being able to have those conversations, take action, provide funds for this creation, provide funds for ERGs, have ERGs also be able to have influence on policy that is being created, and being able to accept what that builds long-term beyond their time.
Alia, chime in here.
Yeah, I think leaders can be so far removed from what is happening within their organizations. And I encourage my leaders to do what we call 2-level down meetings. Like, sometimes you're missing what's really happening within your organization because you're only dealing with your direct reports. But what would it be like to have coffee with 2 levels down to really understand what is happening nuanced throughout the organization? And I agree with Amanda. I'm going to say that, yes, it's about legacy. What is the legacy you want to leave behind? And it's about board leadership too. So when we talk about leadership, we tend to always be thinking about the figurehead, right? But really, it's the boards that are leading behind the scenes. And so what does that board development look like? And when you talk about a leader who doesn't care or have compassion or empathy, I would say that the onus or the dereliction of duty is the board, by not pushing to ensure that they have a leader in place that is making sure that there is care, compassion, empathy, innovation, and creativity happening within the organization. So legacy, and what does that board development look like, and what are their demands of the leader in charge?
I love it. Well, we're definitely leaving a legacy behind here at the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. 2 amazing guests today. I'd like to give you guys the opportunity to give some brief closing remarks to the audience. Amanda, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I just want to say thank you to everybody for the amazing questions. This could go on for honestly 2 hours with how many questions there are. But the biggest part about psychological safety is building trust with yourself, and trusting yourself to be able to step into situations and know what is best for you. And I think that a lot of places, companies, organizations, society likes to tell us that we are not enough and make us question ourselves over and over. But my biggest ask of everyone who's on here is to build that trust within yourself and build your confidence so that you know who you are, what you align with, and what is going to work best for you to be able to handle any situation that comes at you in the workplace. Excellent.
Alia, closing remarks, please.
Absolutely. I would say let's not miss any of the steps. Let's start with that foundation of psychological safety so that when employees feel safe and then they can be seen, and then they will stretch. And what we all want in our organizations is innovation and creativity. So let's start with the foundation, and that foundation is psychological safety.
Well, I think we gave people a very great start today. I want to thank you all for joining us for creating safe spaces, enhancing psychological safety in teams. Two amazing guests today, Alia Sutton-Bay, Amanda Treppa. Listen, if you want to stay connected with the work that either of these young ladies are doing, please lock in with Alia Sutton. I know the website is popping. I've looked at her website. Great stuff happening over there. I know she's on LinkedIn sharing her work as well. Look, Facebook, LinkedIn, her blog, all great resources for you to continue to walk this journey towards psychological safety. Also, if you want to connect in with Amanda's doing really big things out there in Michigan and Detroit and other places as well. I believe Connecticut. So please check out the work website. She's on LinkedIn. I see her doing things. I know she's coming through New York City soon. She tells me she'll be returning back, but you can stay in touch with her on Instagram as well. If you want to stay connected to me and the work we're doing here at the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series and at East Coast Executives, the website. Also on LinkedIn, I always tell you guys, please do not hesitate to connect with me after the show on LinkedIn. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if this was your first time joining us. We just want to hear from you and see how we can continue to grow the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. Please think about joining us for the national conference this summer in Cleveland, Ohio as well. All right, look, speaking of joining us, our next show will take place on May 21st, Preventing Workplace Burnout. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. We're sticking with the theme, right? Preventing Workplace Burnout. We got a great guest. I'm not going to announce her right now, but she's out of DC. She got some books out about this actual topic, so I'm excited to have her joining us for Preventing Workplace Burnout on May 21st. I'd like to leave by thanking my colleagues at the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series and National Urban League, Corey O'Donnell behind the scenes doing great work, Dave Gannon, and also Wanda Jackson and Julius Jones for leading us on this journey here today. So with that being said, most importantly, I'd like to thank you all for continuing to join us, continuing to make this great, continuing to share questions. It's Kenneth L. Johnson, the Urban League Jobs Network Digital Career Success Series. We'll see you on May 21st, Preventing Workplace Burnout. Thank you.